So here are those functions we just wrote in the previous video, and here is an example of using this to process some actual data. So I have this type called student that I created. And clearly, if I'm doing that, I probably want to store records for more than one student at a time. So I guess it makes sense that if I want to store multiple students, I could make an array of them. And I can make an array, of course, of any type. And student is a type. So, of course, I can make an array of type student. And what I'll do is I'll make the array, and then I will initialize each student. And one thing you should think about is, how easy would it be if I were reading data for these students out of a file? I mean, sure, there would be the question of how do I pick apart the file to get the name and the student number, but I could just loop through a file to pick up the data for each student. And then I could process it like I would working with a spreadsheet of my grades or something. And in fact, I actually do use programs that I write to work to do things like compute grades, and it's in a similar vein. I create an object to refer to each student's data, and then I read them from a file, and then I process them, probably using functions. So here I set each element of my array to be data for a different student. I can then create pointers to individual elements of the array to add grades to each student one by one. And then I can loop through all the students, and I can print out the details for the student and their average grade. Now, in this case, what I've done, and I often do this in loops that I write myself in C code, what I've done here is on line 125 inside my loop, although I'm welcome to just work with all students sub I find that it can be a little bit distracting to have to constantly look at this indexed expression. And because I want to work with a pointer anyway, what I like doing is just create a pointer variable called this student, and then I'll set that to the pointer that I'm working with. That way I can just pass it in directly. There's no need for ampersands. If I want to print out the student, I just pass in the this student pointer. And if I want to compute their average grade, I just pass in the pointer again. So I actually do this myself. And on my model solutions to things like assignment 6, I've actually done this just to clean things up a bit. It's completely optional. It doesn't really change anything about the code, but it does make it a bit more readable. So we'll try running this. Oh, right, yes. I forgot to add my include for stdlib.h because I'm using that exit function. There we go. So we'll scroll back down and we'll try compiling again. Oh, yeah, okay. So maybe we're seeing a pretty catastrophic copy and paste failure here. Add grade is not supposed to return anything. Okay, third time's the charm. So now we'll try running this. I used to say I like leaving in the mistakes I make because it teaches people that I make mistakes. But honestly, the mistakes I keep making in these videos are so boneheaded that you wouldn't make them. They're not syntax errors. They're just obvious copying and pasting problems. Okay, so here we go. And we look at the summary printed. So I'm looping over. There's a student at index, the student at index 0. And here's who I installed at index 0. This is their name. They have 2 grades on file. That looks good. Let's do a spot check. Let's take a look at index 4. Okay, the student at index 4, that would be this student here. Name checks out. They have these 3 grades on file, and their average grade is 60, which is as expected. And so maybe you could see how we could adapt this to, let's say, read a file containing all the students' names and student numbers, and then read a second file that contains all the grades for each student. Maybe it contains multiple grades for some students and only 1 grade for others. And we could use these functions to easily organize our data in the context of our program so it becomes easy to work with it. It isn't as difficult as having to think about how we entangle the data from multiple files. Once we've read the data into our array of students, it's as easy as calling these functions we've already defined that work with 1 student at a time. And so one extra task you can try is write a function that takes this array of students, the whole array, so the function as its argument is taking an array of type student, and computes the class average, and then call that function from this point in main and print the result out.